I'd been putting it off, but it was finally time to clean out my garage. So on February 10th, 2012, I rolled my wheelchair out into the garage and began cleaning up the pile that had been accumulating over the many years of my life. As I kept moving junk, I noticed the Beetle Light footlocker that I hadn't seen for years. It was still collecting dust and spiderwebs over in the corner under the window. It was an old, dirty military storage box that all of us kids were issued to keep our stuff in. It had been so many years that I had almost forgotten I still had it. Back in the 1980s, I journaled everything that happened to me during this time, and stored the journals in this footlocker. It was my job to draw illustrations and write descriptions of my experiences, as well as what my teammates told me their experiences were, and put them down in these journals. I rolled my wheelchair over to the footlocker, unlocked it, and opened the top of it. A puff of dust flew up in the air as the lid of the chest fell back. I could clearly see the neatly stacked journals were still as I had left them over 30 years ago. When I looked inside, I had forgotten how many of these I had done. Back when I had written these journals, it was a very scary time for our country. There was a Cold War going on between the United States and the Soviet Union, which is now Russia. These journals were top secret and could not be shown to anyone outside the government at the time. But now that Russia was no longer an enemy, they had been declassified and I was free to share them with anyone. It's strange for me to think that so much of my life was wrapped up in this little green beetle, which was the firefly symbol representing Beetle Light. So these are the journals of my life and the lives of my friends during that time. This all started when I was a 12-year-old boy in a small eastern coastal town in the United States, with an old Indian name called Lightning Bow. This is the next journal of the sequence, and is an account of my first experiences with the secret world of Beetle Light. This is Beetle Light Journal number 2, The Night Raid. Chapter 1. Opening the Door to Beetle Light. Well, here I am writing about what happened after I was invited to interview with the secret Beetle Light organization. I will review quickly what took place at the end of journal number 1. After a very interesting adventure in the cemetery and lighthouse with 3 ghosts here in our small town of Lightning Bow, I was able to design and invent a very fast wheelchair racer, which I called a wheel racer. I challenged the guys to race me down Monument Hill, which overlooks our little town of Lightning Bow. It is the steepest hill in town. With my newly designed wheel racer, I was able to beat the fastest bicycle in town. What I didn't know when I was racing the guys down Monument Hill was that some very important people from this secret organization called Beetle Light were there watching me and my invention race downhill as well. One day I was hanging out with a girl I had a crush on named Rosa at the archery range in the Briarwood Rehabilitation and Training Center. An officer dressed in black from the secret Beetle Light organization came up to me and handed me an envelope with an invitation and a special pass in it. This would get me into the Beetle Light security area. It was located behind the Briarwood Training Center. Briarwood was where athletes and people with disabilities trained for the Paralympics or Special Olympics, and were rehabilitating from injuries and diseases. I trained at Briarwood a lot because I hoped to compete in the 1988 Paralympics that were coming up in a few years as a wheelchair racer. I'm an inventor and an artist. The wheel racer that I designed and hoped would help get me into the 1988 Paralympics was of interest to these people in the secret world of Beetle Light for some reason. Or so I thought. So I accepted the electronic pass and ID badge from the officer and went to the Beetle Light complex to see what it was all about. Beetle Light was a very secret organization, and nobody that I knew had a clue what it was about or what went on inside. When I was invited for possible membership, I went as instructed to the security gate, showed the guard my pass, and went through. When inside the gate, I came to a door, and I swiped my electronic Beetle Light card in the security box next to the door. The door opened automatically to reveal something amazing. Before I write about what I saw inside the door, let me give you a little tip that I learned when I went inside the Beetle Light complex about people with so-called disabilities. The next time you are out walking around and see someone disabled, don't be so sure that they are not part of a secret organization. People that I had seen every day at the Briarwood Training Center and had just assumed were people dealing with different medical conditions were not at all who I thought they were, as I was about to find out. Like most people who lived in my little town of Lightning Bow, we all knew that the Department of the Interior had taken over the old granite quarry pit, which had gone out of business about 40 years ago. It left a gigantic hole in the ground the size of a football stadium and was very deep in some places. Many people who had flown over the Beetle Light complex in airplanes had reported seeing a huge glass dome now covering the giant quarry pit. They said the dome covered what looked like a forest under the glass, but could not see any more than that. The government story was that they had an endangered species protection project going on in there. It was to protect our particular species of firefly that lives locally. It was important because of the strange synchronization light show that this particular species, Photinus carolinus, did every June. I'll talk more about this later. The only thing people in our town knew that whatever the Beetle Light complex was, it was behind a strong, intimidating security gate and off limits to most people. So, picking up where I left off with my last journal, I came to the Beetle Light main security door and slid my card through the electronic key. The door opened, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I saw a huge glass dome made up of thousands of glass triangles. They call it a geodesic dome. It completely covered the old rock quarry pit, and now that I was inside, I could see what looked like a giant forest that had grown up over 40 years inside the quarry pit. Under the huge dome, there was a path for me leading to the side door with another security card reader for me to slide my card through. When important people came to see the forest area inside, they had to come through the front door, not the security door I was led to. I was about to see the behind-the-scenes view of the Beetle Light complex. As the door opened, I saw this huge cavernous underground enclosure covered by a great glass-domed roof. It let the light through to this entire dugout area that was once the quarry pit. Once inside, I could look up and see thousands of glass triangles attached to each other, which made up the dome that covered this mini magical world. I could see different levels built inside the quarry pit. And kids like me with disabilities were busy working, training for something, and having fun. There was a section that looked like a forested area with waterfalls coming out of the rock walls into streams that led to ponds on the floor of the forest section. In the darker areas of the forest, I could see fireflies brightly flying in the trees. Above the trees was a very cool thing. It was kind of a wheelchair hand-cycle highway that made its way above and through the treetops. Since the forest floor was rough and left in its natural state, these skywalks looked to be the quickest way to get across the forest by everybody. If you were in a wheelchair or using a hand cycle, however, they would be extra fun because you could glide across the treetops. It looked like some of the kids were flying as they wheeled through the tree canopies. They were clearly having more fun than the people that were just walking. It all looked like a giant theme park with different levels in the forest. I could see the old caves in the sides of the quarry walls that I had seen years ago were still there, but now they had been enclosed as buildings. They now looked out over the forest and were being used as training rooms, offices, and cafeteria. They looked out over the entire complex. The other forested tropical sections were still in their natural state from before the rock quarry was covered. The ferns were growing out of the walls where water was coming out and falling into the streams below, making their way into the caves, where I could see something glowing. You can read more about that in journal number 4. Looking closer, I saw zip lines suspended above the forest. The kids were tied to them and could fly across the treetops in the forested areas. Some of these kids had artificial legs and arms, some had Down syndrome and other things. It looked like this place was designed for kids that had physical challenges for some reason. But, like everything else at this point, I'd find out what was going on later. There were also some men and women in white coats that looked like scientists on one of the other zip lines. They were studying and taking samples of the fireflies high up in the treetops. They were above the trees, but below the skywalks that weave their way above and through the forest. I think the kids were using the scientists' zip lines for fun when the scientists weren't. There were paths and bridges down on the ground that went across the forest floor and over the streams and ponds, but they would take longer to get around. Because of this, it looked like most people took the skywalks to get across the forest area quickly and over to what looked like the main reason for this place, a secret government aircraft hangar. This area was hidden on the other side of this fake forest curtain that divided the quarry pit complex into two parts. Visitors to the Firefly Forest could not see the government aircraft hangar in the Beetle Light complex for some reason. Questions in my head were piling up. What is this place, I wondered. I rolled up to the highest point where I could get a good view of everything. There was a large fake curtain that looked like a Hollywood forest backdrop that had fake branches and leaves attached to it. It spanned across the quarry pit under the glass dome. It divided the magical forest side with the fireflies from the aircraft hangar and the black helicopters, offices, and training areas for the athletes. These athletes looked like me. The aircraft hangar side of the complex was all undercover, and the kids like me in wheelchairs or who had other disabilities were doing some pretty cool things. As I rolled down the ramp that led me to the aircraft hangar side of the complex, I could now clearly see it had a huge cement floor. There were 2 black helicopters with Beetle Light symbols on them. Military personnel and scientists were wearing white lab coats and walking around with clipboards taking notes. It was clear they had covered the quarry pit and converted the enclosed area for some kind of government special operations project. This giant aircraft hangar was abuzz with activity and had many people milling around, some in military uniforms. I could see many people with disabilities doing cool stuff with high-tech equipment. Some were hooked up to giant hang gliders. Back in 1984, I had never seen or even heard of anything like this before. As I scanned across the aircraft hangar area, I remember seeing tables and workbenches where people were welding special wheelchairs together. These vehicles did cool things like allowed you to go off-roading with hand power only. They called them off-road hand cycles, or ORHCs. I saw a girl practicing with a crossbow on one of these hand cycles. I rolled over to the aircraft hangar area because that's where the official-looking people were, and I wanted to know what this invitation that I had been given was all about. There was a group of kids who were amputees who had made secret compartments in their prosthetic arms and legs that opened up to reveal hidden things like the same crossbow I had seen earlier. It collapsed down to fit inside her leg. This was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. There was also a kid that had a small radio-controlled helicopter that fit in the secret compartment of one of his artificial legs. And inside the other leg was a remote control for that helicopter which controlled its flying. There was a miniature camera mounted on the front of the model helicopter for taking pictures from the sky that this Beetle Light kid could control. I was beginning to think these kids were all special agents of some kind. There was this one kid with Down syndrome who was exercising on a rowing machine for the Special Olympic sculling or boat rowing competition over in the corner. I found out later that his name was Ted, and he was also an expert photographer in long-distance night photography for covert operations. Ted was also in charge of the treetop glow houses, where all the glow sticks were stored for the scientists working in the forest canopy studying the fireflies. These were the tree houses built high in the treetops. Let's just say that Ted really scored, because being allowed to be in charge of the glow houses was one of the best jobs in this place, and everybody wanted this job. More about the treetop glow houses in Journal 4. I saw a hearing-impaired girl at one end of this giant room with binoculars, watching 2 people talking at a table that was mocked up to look like a little cafe. It was 100 feet away from her, and she was speaking in sign language to another girl that was hearing impaired, who was watching her through another pair of binoculars even farther away. The girl was practicing reading lips from the people sitting in the cafe, and was speaking through her hands to tell the other girl everything the people at the table were talking about. The girl watching the sign language from the other girl was writing down everything the two people at the cafe were saying. I guess they were being tested on getting the conversation right. I could tell what these girls were doing was very important because a military officer was watching how closely they got the conversation correct from across the room and taking notes on a clipboard. These girls must be undercover agents. Then I saw the kid with the hidden compartments in his artificial legs, who was older than me, lifting what looked like hundreds of pounds of weights from a weight training machine he had set up in the forest area. At the time I didn't know what he was training for, but I would. The girl I saw a minute ago practicing shooting her crossbow from the hand cycle then drove it right into the ultralight airplane cockpit. It was clearly designed for it. She was practicing with the controls of this small airplane under the supervision of some guy in a white lab coat. I saw this one kid directing someone who was attaching what looked like some kind of rocket down under a hang glider. I looked again, and to my surprise the boy sitting in the chair was someone I knew. It was my best friend Chase's twin brother Jeff. The reason Chase and Jeff's family moved here to the town of Lightning Bow was because of the Briarwood Rehabilitation and Training Center for Jeff. Now he's sitting there with a jet engine in his lap. It was weird. There was another kid who had a toolbox on his bed. It kind of looked like a hospital bed. He had tubes running into his arms, and he didn't have any hair. It didn't seem to get in the way of the work he was doing, though. He was controlling a small, very fast, radio-controlled car that came out of the bottom of a hidden tube under this other kid's wheelchair. It had a tiny camera mounted on the front of it, and the kid in the bed was looking at a TV screen on the wall. It showed everything that the little car camera could see. At the same time, he had a small radio-controlled helicopter with a camera on it, flying over his bed. He was controlling the car and the helicopter at the same time, and the images from their cameras were showing up on the TV screen in front of his bed. This kid was a genius. I found out later his name was Sam, and he was dealing with cancer. Sam was an expert at flying and designing radio-controlled vehicles, so he was asked to be part of the Beetle Light radio-controlled vehicle division. I didn't understand any of what I was seeing, but it was amazing to see all these kids like me using every kind of technology that I had never seen before. It was so cool. I remember thinking this all must have cost a lot of money. Something that caught my attention when I rolled out into the giant hangar part of the Beetle Light complex was a huge flag with a Trojan horse on it, hanging down below the dome. I couldn't figure out what it meant, but again, I would know soon enough. Chapter 2. Major Santos introduces himself. As I sat there looking at all these people going about the business of training, a military man rolled over to me in his wheelchair. He could see I was overwhelmed by everything I was seeing. He introduced himself as Major Santos. He said, "I'll bet you have some questions right about now, don't you?" I just nodded because I was still in a little shock at everything I was seeing. The first thing he said to me after that was, "Congratulations, it's quite an honor to be asked to join Beetle Light." I just said, "Thank you," because I didn't know what else to say. He continued on and said, "Welcome to Beetle Light headquarters, or what we call here Beetletown." I just looked at him with wonder and said, "Beetletown? What is all this, and who paid for it?" He said that it was a Department of Defense, or as they called it, a DoD project called Beetle Light. He added that the cover story for this secret part of the complex was that it was a Department of the Interior project to save and protect our town's particular species of firefly, Photinus carolinus, which is here in Lightning Bow. They were actually doing this over in the forest and tropical areas under this huge glass dome. The complex would protect the little bugs all year round. The main reason for the Beetle Light complex, or Beetletown, was to have the base for special operations using kids with disabilities that have developed special talents and send them on covert operations. This would allow them to hide behind the cover of their disability. No one would ever suspect a kid with a disability could be an undercover agent for the United States government. Major Santos said, "Look around. All these kids have compensated for their disability with at least one other talent that is useful for missions we send them on. The best part? No one would ever suspect these kids of being undercover agents. Major Santos was a really strong and tough guy, but he seemed to be a nice guy as well. He cared about his kid agents, and they were very loyal to him. He pointed around and said all of this was built for a very important mission that some of our undercover agents you see here are training for as we speak. You were invited here to be part of this mission as well if you volunteer for it. We will get to that later, but it's important for you to know that this mission is of the utmost importance to the security of our country, and in particular the United States submarine fleet. He said that we were using this old quarry pit because it was perfect for training, and the Firefly cover story would protect what we were really doing here. Also, having Beetletown located right next to the Briarwood Paralympic Training Center was perfect for recruiting the best and most talented disabled kids in the country. Major Santos said anything you might need is here. We have workout rooms, a couple of restaurants for you to check out. We have pools for training divers in underwater scuba diving and shooting ranges. We have cave areas that were dug out in the walls of this quarry pit, leading to special training rooms and offices. Major Santos then leaned over to me as if to give me some inside information and said, "You have to try Dirty Zerts down in our cafeteria area. It is a little cafe run by Doris, one of our instructors for our hearing impaired agents. She's a great cook as well." I just had a confused look on my face. Major Santos continued, "The kids love to go there in their time off. Dirty Zerts serves what the kids called potted dirt, but it's really chocolate pudding with ground up Oreo cookies and gummy worms buried inside a plastic flower pot. Looks like dirt. Trust me, you'll love it." He went on to say, "You have already seen the forest area aside, where we are raising the fireflies your town is famous for. This is the area we sometimes let public officials in to see, as our cover story for what really goes on here. This hangar and the other operations areas we never show the outside world, or it would blow the cover of the kids, and they wouldn't be able to accomplish their missions as undercover agents. So I don't need to tell you, this is top secret." I nodded yes, that I understood. By the way, this is what the potted dirt dessert looked like. I remember pointing up at the Trojan horse flag that was hanging above us and asking, "Hey, what's with the Trojan horse?" Major Santos told me it was a reminder of what they do here at Beetle Light. They were all about stealth. Just like the ancient story of the Trojan horse, as the enemy brought the giant Trojan horse into the walls of the castle, it had soldiers hiding inside it. Thinking the horse was a gift, the enemy was surprised when the soldiers hiding inside jumped out and took the castle to accomplish their mission. All Beetle Light agents were expected to use stealth to accomplish their missions. I then asked him, "What missions? What do you guys do? Where did you all come from? Why am I here?" All of a sudden I wanted answers for everything. Major Santos told me to slow down. I'd have answers for everything in time. I followed him over to his desk that looked out on this giant hangar room where everyone was working and training. Chapter 3. Major Santos gives the Beetle Light backstory. Major Santos got settled and reached for a photo or something. He said, "I'm a Navy SEAL and lost the use of my legs on a mission that failed in Cuba. And because that mission failed, all of this was created." He said it was a long story, so I should sit back and he would catch me up on where Beetle Light came from. He said, "A year ago I jumped out of an airplane and parachuted down on a special mission in Cuba to rescue a very important scientist from the Soviet Union Navy, which, as you know, is an enemy of the United States today." Major Santos pulled out a picture of a Russian scientist. He continued on, "The mission was to rescue this man, Dr. Boris Steingart, along with his wife and young daughter, who wanted freedom from the Soviet Union. Dr. Steingart was stationed on a Russian submarine that was located at the submarine base in Cuba, which is allied with Russia." Now Major Santos pulled out a map of Cuba. He said, "The island of Cuba is very close to the United States, and we have a military base on one end of the Cuban island, called Guantanamo Bay. We in the military call it Gitmo. A United States submarine and a team of U.S. Navy SEALs were sent to pick up Dr. Steingart and his family after our intelligence services informed us that he wanted freedom for his family from the Soviet Navy and wanted refuge in the United States. Dr. Steingart helped build the Soviet Navy and knew all their secrets. So you can see why it was so important to get him over to our side in order to find out these secrets. Even as a kid, I remembered that people defected from many of the countries the Soviet Union controlled back in the 1980s. People wanted out because there was no freedom in these countries to do what you wanted to do or go where you wanted to go. Some brave people risked being caught to be free. If you were caught, the guards would shoot you or put you in a prison camp until you convinced them that you would not try to escape the country again. Many people died in these prison camps under hard labor conditions. Major Santos pointed at a picture of a refinery as he continued to tell the story. The night of the rescue and escape of Dr. Boris Steingart, my mission was to get to the control room at the center of the refinery, located here in a place next to the submarine base. At that point, I would turn a lever and open an underwater intake gate leading to the submarine security area. This would allow one of our Navy SEALs to swim through the open pipe into the sub-base underwater so the guards wouldn't be aware. There was only one way into the control room where the lever to open the underwater gate was. It was through a large pipe that came from the mining operation in the mountain next to the refinery. Major Santos explained, when I was crawling through the rusty pipes, which were too small for someone my size, I broke through the bottom of the rusty pipes with my feet because the pipes were so old and rusty. The metal had worn so thin and the pipes were very tight for someone my size and could not support my weight. I fell through the piping to the ground below, breaking my back. That caused me to lose the use of my legs during the mission. Other Navy SEALs from my team came and rescued me before I could be captured. We always take care of our own and never leave a man behind. When I broke through the pipe, the guard's alarm went off and gave my position away. The refinery and the submarine base were alerted, and there were soldiers and guards looking everywhere. We barely got away, and the mission failed. Major Santos continued with his story. We had gotten word to Dr. Boris Steingart that this was the night of the escape, and he, his wife, and daughter needed to get down to the water in an old boat that was there to take them out to sea. One of our submarines was waiting to pick them up and take them to safety. However, when the alarm went off, the guards saw that Boris was trying to escape with his family down by the shore, and they started running toward them. Major Santos said Boris saw them coming and jumped out of the boat so the guards would chase him and not go after his wife, and she could escape into the darkness with their daughter. His wife didn't want to go, but Boris said it was the only chance their daughter might have to be free and have a happy life. Boris's wife reluctantly took the motor controls and headed out to sea in the tiny boat, hoping to find our submarine. After Boris pushed the boat off, he ran away from his wife's boat so the guards would chase him and not his family. He was a scientist and an engineer that had helped build the Soviet submarine fleet. He was important to them, so Boris knew they would chase him and not his wife and daughter. Boris's wife made it far out to sea in the blackness of the night, so Boris felt a little relief even though he was about to be caught. The guards finally caught up to Boris and brought him back to the sub-base, where the giant gun protecting the base started firing in the direction of the tiny boat Boris's wife and small daughter were in. Boris started pleading with this huge guard named Vlad Korsk. Vlad was an evil man who was a really mean Soviet guard who intimidated everyone and enjoyed hurting people. He was the commander of all the guards that protected the Soviet submarine base. If any of the guards didn't do their job the way he wanted, he would personally beat them to keep them in line. Even the Soviet soldiers and Navy men were afraid of Vlad, and that's the way Vlad liked it. Boris was panicked and said he would do anything if Vlad would stop shooting the giant cannon in the direction of the small boat that contained his wife and daughter as they tried to escape. Vlad ordered the soldier that was firing the cannon to continue shooting. He said to the soldier firing the cannon, "They are trying to escape. Keep firing." The soldier controlling the cannon didn't know what he was firing at because he hadn't seen Boris's wife and daughter get in the boat. He was too afraid of Vlad anyway, so he kept firing the giant gun. The powerful gun was exploding all around the tiny boat and was getting closer and closer to blowing it up. Boris kept pleading for Vlad to stop shooting, but Vlad would not. Boris's hopes of his family escaping were dashed when, after the giant gun fired one last time, there was a huge explosion in the boat, destroying everything in a giant fireball. It was at least half a mile out to sea, but you could clearly see the boat was destroyed. Boris saw the tiny boat that his wife and daughter had been in completely blown up into a million pieces. Boris yelled, "No!" and fell to the ground. Vlad just laughed and said, "Let this be a lesson to you, that this is what happens when you try to escape and not fulfill your duty to support our glorious submarine fleet." The guards dragged Boris back to his submarine and put him in his quarters under guard. Boris was so sad that his wife and daughter had been killed, he didn't care what happened to him now. And the first chance he got, he would try to escape again. I remember feeling really sad for Boris and his family, which had just been killed in front of him. I was surprised when I looked over at Major Santos and he was smiling about this tragedy I had just heard. He went on to say what Boris and Vlad didn't know at the time was that a United States submarine had surfaced far out to sea, and our Special Forces team, called the Navy SEALs, had paddled over to Boris's wife's boat. They pulled her and her daughter safely off the boat. With the cover of darkness, the SEALs put them into a raft which took them back over to the waiting U.S. submarine. All of this was going on while the gun was shooting at them from the shore. The SEALs placed a remote control explosive charge in the tiny boat after they had gotten the mother and the daughter out and safely back to the U.S. submarine. When the U.S. submarine was far enough away from the tiny boat, the captain was looking through the periscope at the guns firing from the shore at the boat. He waited for the perfect moment to have one of his Navy SEALs push the remote control button that would explode Boris's wife's boat. This would make everyone on shore believe they hit the tiny boat. The captain watched through his periscope and saw the flash on the shore from the giant gun. He then quickly motioned to the Navy SEAL to push the explosive button, and he did. They timed it perfectly. The boat that Boris's wife had been on blew up in a huge explosion, and Vlad and the guards on shore thought they had hit it and stopped the escape. The U.S. submarine submerged and headed back for home to come up with another plan to help Dr. Steingart escape. After the boat explosion, Vlad had hoped that by making an example of Boris's wife and daughter, that he would scare Boris into staying in line and doing what he was told. This did just the opposite, and Boris would never help the Soviet submarine navy again. He would be planning his next escape attempt as soon as possible. Boris was destroyed inside and did not know his wife and daughter were actually safe in the U.S. submarine. Boris also didn't know that his daughter was, at that very moment, enjoying a chocolate ice cream cone down in the ship's galley with the sub's cook and her mother, deep underwater inside the submarine. Major Santos said that he was also in the submarine, seriously injured from his fall from the pipes in the refinery. The submarine doctor was doing everything he could to keep him alive until they could get back to a United States hospital. Major Santos continued on with his story and said, "When I got back to the United States and recovered in a military hospital, I had to get used to not having the use of my legs. It was a very hard time for me to adjust, but I finally got through it. And my commander came to my hospital bed one day to visit me. I told him I wanted to get back into shape and somehow finish our mission to rescue Dr. Steingart, so what happened to me would not have been for nothing. My commander didn't see how I could do that, but he was going to try to get more intelligence on where Boris was and see if there was something that could be done to try to help him escape again. Now it was going to be much harder. Dr. Steingart would be of great help to the United States because he had knowledge of the entire Soviet submarine navy. And if he came over to our side, our navy could use that knowledge to better defend our country." Major Santos continued, "Then my commander said that he was going to send me to this little town named Lightning Bow, where Paralympians went to train at a rehabilitation center. He said the place was called Briarwood, and that at this place I could get my strength back, and that maybe I could be part of a second attempt at rescuing Dr. Steingart somehow. This is how I ended up here at Briarwood. Major Santos told me that while he recovered here at Briarwood, his commander visited him one day, and they were trying to figure out how to get Dr. Steingart out of the Soviet sub-base. The commander said they had found which submarine he was confined on in Cuba. Boris was watched all the time because they didn't trust him anymore, and they thought he might try to escape again. The problem was how to get him out of the sub he was being held in. They couldn't figure a way to do it, since the pipes that Major Santos had broken through, trying to get to the control room, now had large holes in parts of the bottom of them. Crawling through these rusted pipes, with their many turns and obstacles, was the only way into the control room where the gate lever was. Someone had to pull that lever to open the underwater gate so an agent could swim through the underwater pipes and get into the submarine base to rescue Dr. Steingart. Even though they had holes in them, they were almost impossible to get through. The pipes above the refinery would be watched more closely than ever by the guards now. Major Santos told the commander that the pipes were too small for a full-size man to get through anyway. Even if you could get past the holes in the bottom of the pipes, there must be another way to get into the control room. The commander said no, the pipes are the only way into the control room without having a full battle with the guards. Our government does not want to have a confrontation with Cuba. This must be a stealth operation. The commander left Major Santos's special ops duffel bag with all his equipment in it with him. As the commander walked out the door, he said that command was still trying to figure a way into the Russian subbase, so not to give up on the idea. Major Santos kept thinking about how to accomplish the mission too, as he healed from his injuries. Chapter 5. Our Firefly Festival. Here in Lightning Bow we have an odd natural occurrence with a particular species of firefly, which happens every June and lasts for about 2 weeks. It is synchronized light flashing of thousands of fireflies. They flash their light at the same time. It is a strange thing to see them get into sync with each other and flash. Tourists come from all over the country to watch this every year. Lightning Bow is an Indian name for our town that came from this strange natural event every year. People think that way back one year the Indians saw the fireflies light up the sky and it happened to be in the shape of a bow, and they named this valley Lightning Bow. I guess the name stuck because here we are 300 years later living in the little town of Lightning Bow. Because of this tourist attraction, fireflies are very important to the Lightning Bow economy. And in our town, all fireflies are protected by law. If you hurt or destroy a firefly here, it's a big deal, and you will be in big trouble with the county sheriff. Because of the firefly synchronization event and the tourists, our town depended on the tourists to spend money here every year. We have an annual Firefly Festival here every summer, where all the kids in town collect thousands of fireflies in jars. On the night of the festival, the town gets together in the town square and all the kids open the lids of their jars at the same time. This lets the fireflies go up into the air together, making a spectacular light show. It's very cool. Major Santos said that one day at lunch in the school cafeteria, a hearing-impaired girl named Sarah Roberts was watching kids across the other end of the cafeteria talking. It was Rodney Bass, one of the worst bullies in our school, and his friends Norman Tice and Kelly Martin, talking about what they were going to do to their fireflies they caught in their jars this year at the Firefly Festival. As Major Santos told the story, I even knew who these guys were, especially Rodney Bass. I saw Rodney pick up one of the smallest kids in gym class one day, when no one was looking, and put his head in the toilet. Everybody was scared of Rodney, so no one reported the incident, including me. Or the kid that got his head dunked in the toilet. He loved picking on the weaker kids. Rodney was a mean kid, and everybody was afraid of him. Major Santos went on to say that Sarah can read lips very well, even across a room. She came back to her friends here at Briarwood Rehabilitation Center and told the group that Rodney and his friends planned to get a potato masher and smash all the fireflies they caught in their jar to try to make glow mush out of their lightning bugs. So their plan was not to let their fireflies go with the other kids the night of the festival. This, of course, was illegal in our town. As Major Santos was telling the story, I knew what Rodney and his friends were going to do was against the law in our town, but without proof they would get away with it, just like always. He went on to say that Sarah was part of a really talented group of kids with different disabilities that were in rehabilitation or training for the Paralympics at Briarwood. Sarah went straight to Jeff Stoddard, who trains at Briarwood. As I said earlier, Jeff is a twin brother of my best friend Chase Stoddard. Jeff is one of the smartest kids I know and has a scholarship to one of the biggest universities in the country when he graduates from high school. Sarah came to him and told him everything that Rodney and his friends were going to do the night of the festival. Jeff thought about it and started making a plan to both stop and catch Rodney in the act. These were the bad kids in the school, and they hung out at the old abandoned Peyton Mansion up the street from Briarwood. Sarah said the Peyton Mansion was where they were going to smash the Fireflies the night of the festival. Jeff started putting together a team at Briarwood to go on a night raid to stop Rodney and his friends from killing the Fireflies. Major Santos said while he was healing at Briarwood, he had a chance to watch this entire plan and operation take place right in front of him. It kind of reminded him of what he used to do with the Navy SEALs, and he respected the kids for trying to make a difference and stop this bully who was breaking the law. Jeff was training one day, and Major Santos rolled his chair into the room where Jeff was. Major Santos motioned for Jeff to come over to him. Jeff rolled over to the Major, who had his black covert operations duffel bag on his lap. He unzipped it to show Jeff the contents. Jeff smiled and said nothing. He just nodded. Major Santos said, "Jeff, put your team together. Whatever you need that's legal for you to use in this bag, you can have for your operation." Jeff said, "Thanks. I'll let you know what we need. I'll get back to you with the meeting place." With that, Jeff and Major Santos went their separate ways to plan. Chapter 6. Jeff puts the team together. Major Santos saw that Jeff got right to work putting his team together. Sarah told Jeff that Rodney and his gang were going to meet Saturday night, which was the night of the festival, behind the abandoned Peyton Mansion. All three kids were to bring their collection of fireflies in a giant jar with a big potato masher to mash up the fireflies. They would meet after dark at 9 p.m. in the flower garden at the back of the mansion. Jeff went out to the boathouse that stored all the sculling boats for the rowing competitions and found Ted Johnson, who had Down syndrome, was training as a rower in the Special Olympics sculling competitions. Ted was also training for the javelin toss for the next Special Olympics. Ted's hobby was photography, and he was probably one of the best photographers in town. His mom had entered some of his photographs in the town fair, and he had won 2 blue ribbons for some of his sunset photos. Jeff needed Ted for the plan. Ted, who had been a victim of Rodney's toilet dunking in the past, was all too happy to join in the plan. Next, Jeff went to Jillian Raintree, who didn't have the use of her legs, one of which had been amputated. I found out later she was the granddaughter of the chief of an Indian tribe located in North Carolina somewhere. Jillian was flying with her dad on a hiking trip in Montana, and their plane went down. Her father died in the crash, and that is how she lost the use of her legs, but she survived the crash. She would someday lead her tribe, since her father would not be able to take her grandfather's place when he died. She was one of the top archers in training at Briarwood for the 1988 Paralympics. She could hit anything with a regular bow and arrow or a crossbow. She was kind of a quiet person and just concentrated on being the best at archery. Jeff needed Jillian for the plan and explained what they were going to do. Jillian knew who Rodney Bass was and what he was going to do with the fireflies, so she was definitely in on the plan. Then Jeff went to the weight room to find Justice Reed. He was a double amputee. He lost both his legs in a car accident, but was training as a runner in the upcoming Paralympics, with some experimental legs and feet that Jeff helped design with the local college engineering department. Justice was also going to compete as a weightlifter in the bench press. He was a strong kid for his age. Jeff definitely needed Justice for this plan to work. Justice wanted in on the plan because one of his best friends had also been a toilet victim of Rodney's. Chapter 7. The Abandoned Rock Quarry Pit. At that point, Jeff got everybody together in the old dusty manager's shack that was located in the abandoned rock quarry pit behind the Briarwood complex. It was where Major Santos and I were now sitting, but was covered by the geodesic dome. The quarry pit back then was just a huge hole in the ground that had been closed in the 1940s. It supplied the granite rock for construction projects around the country, as well as many gravestones that are in town cemeteries today. When the quarry went out of business, the old manager's shack sitting in the middle of it was all that was left. More than half of the quarry pit had a 40-year-old forest that had grown up in it over the years. It was a quiet place for our town's fireflies to hang out in. Major Santos said that when Jeff was planning the night raid on Rodney, the old shack was perfect because there was nothing but dust, spiders, wild rabbits, and an occasional rattlesnake or two. It was the perfect place to plan a covert operation. Of course, it wasn't covered at the time and looked nothing like the helicopter hangar I was sitting in right now while I was listening to this story. Everybody arrived at the shack and met at the table that was sitting in the middle of the dusty room, including Major Santos. He put his special ops bag on the table in the middle of everyone. He reached in and pulled out everything in the bag that he thought the team would need. He pulled out a small crossbow, which Jillian was familiar with, and quickly grabbed from the table and said, "This is nice. Who gets to use this?" Jeff indicated that she would be using the crossbow. Jillian smiled and looked like she'd just received a Christmas present. Next, Major Santos pulled out a pair of night vision goggles that let you see in the dark. He pulled them out on the table with a grappling hook attached to a rope, as well as an infrared camera that took pictures in the dark. Jeff, watching all of this, said, "That should do it. We have everything we need here." Jeff moved over to the table and started laying out the plan. Jeff said, "Ted, you get the night vision camera. Be careful with it. It looks expensive." Ted looked at Jeff and said, "It's better than the one I have now." Jeff said, "It better be. It's a night vision camera that shoots pictures in the dark." Ted, looking the camera over, said, "Wow, this is cool." Jeff went on to say, "Jillian, you get the crossbow and the night vision goggles. You're going to have to make a very good shot in the dark and not miss. These night vision goggles will help you see in the dark." Jillian said confidently, "I won't miss." "What am I shooting at?" Jeff said, "I'll tell you in a minute." Jeff said to Justice, "You get the rope and the grappling hook. I hope you're in shape. You're going to be lifting Jillian up a wall." Justice said, "No problem. She's less than half the weight I've been lifting lately for the Paralympics that are coming up." Jillian looked at Justice and said, "I hope so. I'm not that heavy." Major Santos remembered, as he was telling me the story, that Jeff had it all planned out to the last detail, but then he gave a warning that if Rodney and his friends caught them, no one knew what he would do to them behind the Peyton mansion, where nobody would ever see. Rodney was rotten to the core. He was capable of anything. Jeff went on to say that if anybody wanted out, now was the time. No one stepped forward to quit. Jeff said, "Okay, we're a go." Jeff said that he was calling this operation Beetle Light, and Major Santos said that he thought it sounded perfect for this mission. Major Santos said, "Okay guys, I'm providing the equipment. You're on your own now." After giving the plan to everyone, Jeff said, "You all know what to do. Just do what you do best." Major Santos stopped his story at this point and looked at me and said, "This is when it all started, and I first got the idea for Beetle Light." Chapter 8. The Night of the Great Beetle Light Raid. Major Santos got back into the story and said the rest of the details were reported to him from Ted, Justice, and Jillian. This is what they told him. All three of them met back behind the old Peyton mansion in the alley. Ted had the night vision camera, and Jillian had the night vision goggles and crossbow. Justin had the coil of rope with a grappling hook on the end. Justice had his aluminum legs on and was not using his wheelchair, but Jillian had to. They all went to the back alley where the ivy-covered wall overlooking the garden table where Rodney and his friends were going to smash up the fireflies. Justice threw the grappling hook up over the wall, and it caught at the top. With just his upper body strength, he pulled himself up to the top of the wall. Justice lowered the rope for Jillian, and Ted helped tie it under her legs. Justice then pulled her to the top of the wall. Since he was used to lifting much more than her weight at the training center, it was no problem hauling her up. Justice dropped the rope down again to Ted, who was waiting his turn. He wrapped the rope under his legs, and Justice pulled him up as he walked up the side of the wall holding onto the rope. It was only 8:30 and Rodney and the guys weren't going to be there for another half an hour, so everybody got into position on top of the wall to wait. There were trees and bushes covering everybody, where they had a perfect view of the backyard garden table behind the abandoned mansion. The plan was that when Rodney and his friends brought the giant jar to the backyard to smash the fireflies, Ted would take as many pictures as he could of Rodney before he smashed them in the jar. Just before he did, Jillian would get one shot with a crossbow to shoot the jar the fireflies were trapped in. This would explode the jar, freeing all the little fireflies, but getting a good picture of Rodney trying to kill the town's main tourist attraction. If Ted got a good photograph of him doing it, they would have the evidence for the sheriff to arrest Rodney. The problem was going to be, once Jillian shot the jar and Ted took the picture, Rodney would know that someone was on top of the wall behind him, watching the whole thing. If Rodney could run around the wall fast enough, he might catch them trying to get away. Jeff had a plan for an escape as well, but no one knew if it would work before Rodney could run around the wall to the back alley and catch them. A half an hour went by, and everybody was getting a little uncomfortable on top of the wall, waiting for Rodney to show up. Just then they heard Rodney walking up the path, back into the garden area behind the mansion. Rodney was carrying a full glowing jar of fireflies. His friends were following him to the garden area in the backyard of the old mansion. One of Rodney's friends brought a potato masher, and the other was carrying a baseball bat. Everyone on the wall got silently into position. It was very dark, and Jillian put her night vision goggles on, which lit everything up clearly so she could look through the sights on her crossbow. Then she lined up her shot to explode the jar to release the fireflies. Ted could see clearly through the lens of the night vision camera. He was snapping incriminating pictures of what Rodney was doing as fast as the camera would click. He was getting some really good shots. Since the camera was switched to night vision mode, everything was green and the camera was quiet while he was snapping his pictures. Rodney carefully unscrewed the lid of the jar full of fireflies with one hand and covering the now open top with the other hand, so the fireflies couldn't escape. Then he grabbed for the potato masher and put it in the jar to smash the tiny glowing bugs when Jillian took her shot with a crossbow. She hit the jar dead center, and the glass exploded all over the table. The fireflies were unhurt and flying free in every direction. They lit up the sky. When the jar exploded, it startled Ted, who was still taking pictures and holding the camera when his finger slipped and turned the camera into regular flash mode. This changed the camera from night stealth use. The camera was now taking bright, perfect flash pictures of Rodney in the act of breaking the lightning bow law by trying to kill the little fireflies. The problem was, now the flash from Ted's camera gave away Ted's position, and Rodney knew exactly where they all were on the wall behind him. Rodney was really mad, and he knew someone had taken pictures of him breaking the law. He had to get those pictures back no matter what. Rodney yelled, "Who's there? I'm going to get you guys!" Rodney dropped the potato masher, which was the only thing left in his hand now, because the jar had exploded and the fireflies were free and happily flying above all the confusion below. Rodney grabbed his friend's baseball bat and was going to make someone pay for wrecking his plans with the fireflies and taking his picture doing it. He and his friends had to run to the front of the house, which was the only way to get around the wall to the alley behind. Rodney was getting angrier as he ran. He was yelling, "I'm going to kill you guys!" Rodney was coming fast, and it wasn't looking good for the Beetle Light team. They had to get down from the wall and get away before Rodney got around the wall and back to the alley. Ted immediately jumped down from the wall with the camera. Justice held the rope that was tied around Jillian and lowered her down to Ted, who helped her get into her chair quickly and pushed her out of the bushes and into the alley where Major Santos was waiting in the Briarwood van. Justice rappelled down the wall with the rope and ran out to the alley to help Jillian into the van with her chair. Ted and Justice then jumped into the van as it was moving and quickly closed the van door. Major Santos took off down the alley toward town. Justice ran to the back of the window of the van as it sped away, only to see Rodney and his friends finally arrive in the back alley. Justice could see that Rodney unfortunately saw the Briarwood sign on the back of the van as it took off down the street. Justice saw Rodney pointing at him through the window, yelling, "I know who you guys are! I'm going to get you all! You're mine now!" Inside the van, Major Santos looked at Ted and asked, "Did you get the pictures?" Ted proudly said, "Yes, we got him," as he held up the night vision camera in one hand and the incriminating film that had the pictures of Rodney with the jar of fireflies and the potato masher in the other. Then Major Santos looked at Jillian and asked, "Did you make the shot?" Justice jumped in excitedly and said proudly, "She hit the jar dead center." Major Santos said, "Well done. Operation Beetle Light accomplished. There's just one more thing to do," as they drove downtown to the newspaper office. Major Santos pulled up in front of the Lightning Bow Times newspaper building. He took the film that Ted had just taken and put it in an envelope with a note explaining what Rodney and his friends were doing in back of the Peyton mansion. Major Santos sealed the envelope and gave it to Ted to drop off in the mail slot of the newspaper office. Ted got back into the van, and they all headed back to the old quarry pit shack, where Jeff was anxiously waiting to see if the plan had worked. They all arrived and met Jeff back at the old manager's shack and told him that Operation Beetle Light had been a complete success. They were all very excited. At this point of the story, Major Santos looked at me and said that this got him thinking about something that may solve his bigger problem, the mission to rescue Dr. Steingart from the Soviet submarine navy. After seeing what these kids with disabilities could do and combining the undercover aspects of what people think people with disabilities can do, Major Santos had the perfect plan with the perfect team to do the job. This was the beginning of the secret Beetle Light organization. It all started in Major Santos's head that night, and he was on the phone with his commander in Washington the next morning. The next morning, the Lightning Bow Times newspaper arrived at the front doorstep of every house in town, including the sheriff's station, with a clear picture of Rodney killing the town's main tourist attraction. It was on the front cover of the newspaper. You couldn't miss it. By the afternoon, Rodney and his friends were in handcuffs and had been arrested for breaking our town's ordinance, protecting our fireflies. Our town judge gave Rodney and his friends 2 weeks community service cleaning trash along the side of the roads. Their parents weren't too happy with them either. The whole town knew what Rodney had done, and he had to face everyone every day, which was very embarrassing for him and his friends. All Rodney kept thinking about as he picked up trash was how he was going to get back at the kids at Briarwood that he was sure took the pictures that got him into this mess. Chapter 9. Major Santos creates Beetle Light Special Operations. Major Santos said that after the success of the kids' night raid on Rodney Bass, he was sure how they could get Dr. Boris Steingart over to our side and reunited with his family. He immediately called his commander in Washington. Major Santos got his commander on the phone and simply said, "I know how we're going to get him out." He then got permission to put together the special operations organization called Beetle Light, which would be located in this old abandoned quarry pit. Roof construction started immediately, and it was determined to use a geodesic dome because it was the quickest way to cover the quarry pit, which was big enough for all of the mission preparation plans. It would also let in light for the forest areas to support the firefly cover story of the complex, which would be known as Beetletown. This would be the base of operations to finish the mission and help Dr. Steingart defect from the Soviet Navy. The goal was to reunite him with his wife and daughter, who Boris still thought were dead from the boat explosion earlier. So with that, Major Santos put into action his plan and turned the old quarry pit into a super-secret operations area. Now he needed to fulfill the rest of his plan and get the right kids with the right talents to pull this operation off and not get anybody caught or killed in the process. I would soon hear about the entire plan and why I was asked to be part of it. I had no idea the amazing adventure that was in store for me just by saying the word yes, but I did say yes, and I was to find out about the entire operation called Beetle Light, the Cuban Rescue. This project would take us many places doing many things I never thought I could or would do, with machines made especially for me and other team members. It is the subject of the next journal. This would be the biggest night raid of them all, if we had the guts to go through with it. To be continued. Watch for Beetle Light Journal number 3, The Submarine Rescue.